Okay, fine. Like I said, not looking for it. We ready? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Tuesday, December 13th agenda session. I will take a motion on the minutes. Have a motion for the minutes with a second. They will stand without objection. Council, if you will, take a look at items on tonight's agenda for our business meeting. We'll start with finance. I'll watch the board for lights for questions or comments on any of these items. We do have some items on first reading, which we will read at that time for first reading. We do have the three items, Phil, that needed to come in, and we have one item coming in on. Phil, let me stop that. Let me go back here real quick.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we have these the items for the codes.
Yes.
We're coming in on first reading. Okay, and we have no final reading. That's where I was taking a little bit of a misstep there. We have no ordinances on final reading this evening. So take a look at those. If there's any questions, please hit your light for me. Councilwoman Coonrod, you have the floor, ma'am.
Under Finance B, are we able to, for the rental spaces or the use, to change the fee for the recreational with people who, for therapeutic recreation? Those are people that have disabilities.
Well, we always have them. We always have the option to amend from the floor, but this is administrative driven through finance. So I would really like for you to talk to the administration on this particular item.
Yes, Councilwoman. I'm happy to have a longer discussion about this after the meeting, but I did want to say that, we would oppose the adjustment of the fees in part because we were thoughtful on a therapeutic recreation piece. The reason that we lowered the range is because we wanted to be able to add more flexibility around ratios for the need for even 3 instructors in a room. And some of this programming can be expensive. And so in order to enable the city to implement more rich programming that we've seen a demand for, we did give ourselves more flexibility to have a broader range of fees. And, by adding 2 additional instructors, I think we are really going to be able to add programming, but this is a part of that process. So we have added those, that widened that fee range so we can really broaden the range of programming. And that was done in consultation with Parks and Outdoors and the team to make sure that they had the resources that they need to do the work.
Okay, but it wasn't done in consultation with City Council. I get that you all want to do it, but it's really up to council. I hear you though. I would love to discuss it further after the meeting later. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Hill, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, Chair. Related to item B, I just wanted to make everybody aware that there was a miscategorization of a park in District 2, Riverview Park. I've confirmed with the Parks Department is not a signature park. It's a community/neighborhood park. And so the fees would be adjusted accordingly.
Have you made a note?
Scott and I have discussed it.
Okay.
Yeah, and he
So-
let them know it just was miscategorized in the presentation.
Okay. Is that something that you feel we need to address within the ordinance?
I think
as an
they're
amendment?
addressing it
Okay.
on what it won't need to be changed by us, but I just want you all to know
Very
that
good.
that is
That
what's
was my
happening.
question. Thank you very
Mhm.
much. Appreciate that. All right. Any other questions or comments on the update to the code? Moving into have our first reading on the International Fire Code. Mr. Anderson, can you tell us real quick? There was some concern from interested parties, and I believe that change was made and put into the ordinance, correct?
Yes, sir. There were some debate about 3 different sections of the International Fire Code and our adoption of the 2018 version. That was worked out with all parties, including an outside interest group, as well as the fire marshal, the land development office, and our city engineer, Bill Payne. And the draft that you have before you tonight is the recommendation of everyone involved in it, inside and outside the government.
Okay, very good. That's what I wanted to confirm, that all parties have sat and had conversation on this.
Yes, sir. It's a rare unanimous feeling.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you bottle?
If I could, I'd have a lot more money.
Yeah, no doubt. All right. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Moving into item E, are there any questions or comments? We have two versions of this particular ordinance. I'm looking for a light. There it is. Councilman Henderson, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, sir. Hey, Chief, I've got a question.
Yes.
Obviously, we've got, two moratoriums presented here. One is a moratorium for 6 months. The other one is for extended period of a month. And I guess my question is the 6 month moratorium was in order to get some things in place in order to be able to show enforcement. And I guess my question is, at the end of this 6 month period, whether all council members feel like we have a track record of enforcement or not, is administration ready to move forward at the end of this 6 months with the legislation that was presented to this body earlier?
So, I think that the residents of Chattanooga, particularly folks affected by the moratorium, would expect that after a 6 month extension, particularly designed to understand how enforcement affected the legislation and whether or not it gave, council members confidence to proceed, that this council adopt some form of legislation after a moratorium. I think that makes sense. This administration, I think the intention is to get a track record to demonstrate that we can do the enforcement correctly, and then to work with council to advance a piece of legislation forward. I think that Councilwoman Hill made a good point last week, which is that we do have some learning to do in this process. And so I think it's not unforeseeable for the administration it's not unforeseeable for us to imagine that changes may come out of the learning process in the next 6 months. So I don't necessarily know if it would be the exact same legislation, but after the conclusion, if this council does choose to move forward with the 6 month extension of the moratorium, that we would be moving forward with some legislation.
So my concern is at the end of 6 months, we still have council members that's not completely convinced of our track record of enforcement, and then we prolong this even more. That's my real concern here.
I think it's a fair concern, Councilman. I don't share it. I think that the 6 month timeframe was discussed in part because we did feel confident that there would be a sufficient track record of enforcement at that point. And if at that point the enforcement happens and then council members still don't feel like they can support the legislation, if that's the case, then I think that that is a discussion for council to have. But it would be from the administration's perspective, the amount of time that we would need to understand how the enforcement to demonstrate to council that we can effectively enforce this legislation. So I think that was the intention behind the extension around the moratorium.
Okay. So one additional item, Mr. Chair, and it's related to, but not necessarily the moratorium, is the attorney has gotten me the amendments to the original ordinance that I was going to be presenting. And what I'd like to do is maybe present that next week before we go on break, and then ask that it be able to be put into legislative committee, perhaps maybe the first meeting back, for the council to consider this particular piece of legislation, which would be apart from, I think, what the administration will be presenting, simply because my concern is I think we're still going to have some concerns in 6 months with it going citywide. I know when we enacted this originally, I think we all got around the table and came up with a agreement, a solution that everybody seemed to be comfortable with and happy with. I'm not hearing the community clamoring for this to go citywide. The amendments that I'm making to this ordinance would keep the overlay and make a few changes. So I will be presenting next week the amendment to the ordinances, and hopefully we can get it in legislative committee and at least address it.
Councilman, let me ask you, would you like to see that in our strategic planning session to get the ball rolling? Or do you want to present that?
Next week,
Yep.
that'd be perfect.
All right, Madam Clerk, if you don't mind, thank you. I think that's a very appropriate place for us to start that discussion. And then we do have a couple more, well, I had a couple more lights. They're disappeared. Councilwoman Coonrod, you still need the floor? Yes, ma'am.
And Chip raised a couple of points that I did not hire Judge Walter Williams to do enforcement on short-term vacation rentals
It's
and
in a different capacity, but yes.
so he don't manage the short-term vacation
No,
rental
ma'am.
enforcement.
No.
Okay. So
Demolitions.
when we done, could we not just amend his role to include to enforcement?
I don't know the answer to that right off the bat. I mean, I would assume that we could, and I also would say that we've had applicants already drop their names in, some very qualified individuals in this town who wish to do this particular position. That I don't think finding an AHO is going to be a difficult task for us.
I
At all.
don't either. I think he's qualified too, so.
Yeah.
But my concern is that the enforcement, it's gonna always be a problem with us, with council, because it's so many things that we keep talking about, enforcement. And it never gets done. It just keeps being shoved over, put a Band-Aid over it till the next complaint come in. So I would like to see the data that show, what was the enforcement done while the moratorium was here now, and then prior to the moratorium being placed on there, like what's the data of the enforcement? So we can compare the numbers, what was done while because that was a point of the moratorium. But to have nothing, no enforcement while we've had it here, and now we're saying we need 6 more additional months. I just need a guarantee that we're gonna have it done. Like we're not gonna come back. I'm like you, Chip, in 6 more months, and we're asking the same questions, and we're only being told, well, we need an extension. What's gonna change? Y'all don't have the answer.
Is that a question you'd like
Yeah,
someone
I
from
would like
this?
to know
Okay.
what's
Well,
gonna change.
I didn't hear a
That
question.
we know what's gonna change is the question. As far as you all saying that you are gonna have some kind of enforcement measures, like how do we know for certain that you're gonna have something in place to do it? You're saying 6 months, but we've already had 8 months of a moratorium where enforcement was supposed to have been done.
We still have the same plan that I've laid out in strategic planning and in this meeting a couple of weeks ago, which is have the administrative hearing officer in place by March. You have a budget amendment coming to you in a few weeks that will shift money from the hotel motel revenue to hire new inspectors to do the enforcement and enforce the regulations on the illegally operating non-permitted STVRs. That's what all of you have said is the biggest problem, including in your district, Councilwoman, with unregistered ones that aren't following the law. So that's where we're going to focus our enforcement for those 3 months between, well, if we are given 6 months, 3 months after the AHO is instituted and set up and the end of the extension.
Well, the only one that I have is that one on Holly Street. That's unregistered. All the rest of ours kind of comply. But I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Every district had at least 20 unlicensed ones that we uncovered.
I'd like to see that data because I don't see it in my district, but thank you.
I'll get you a list.
You good, Councilwoman? So my question for us this evening to ponder is, we have 2 versions on the agenda, one that is for 30 days and one that is for 6 months. So the question I want to pose to council and hopefully gain clarification is, what does the 30-day give us? Don't say 30 days. And what does the 6-month give us? At the end of, what will we obtain? We always have the option to extend it, when we also always have the option to cut it short. So hence I'm throwing in complexities but that's the reality of both ordinances. We have the opportunity to do both. That's the question I posed council, and if there's anybody who wants to chime in on what the 30-day in this or the 6-month yields us, then I'm happy to turn the floor over. Councilwoman Hill, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, Chair. The difference that I see in the 30 versus the 30-day versus the 6-month is in fact the ability to make some changes to how we are going to be managing enforcement. The administrative hearing officer is a distinctly different tool than we have had in the past. In the past, we've had the ability to have a $50 fine, which you all have had in codes situations, I'm sure, in your district, similar to those I've had in District 2, which unfortunately don't very often make bad actors behave themselves, especially when it's a $50 fine and you come back in a month. Something that we've discussed within the committee, the ad hoc committee, is that it would be very easy to just consider a $50 a month fine the cost of doing business, or even a $50 a day fine. So the administrative hearing officer gives us an opportunity to move toward a $500 fine. And as a member of the committee, I'm hopeful that that is something that is a heavy enough stick to heavy enough penalty to change behavior of people who are flaunting our current regulations. So given that point, I do understand what Mr. Anderson is saying about needing about 3 months to get that going, but also to hire the staff to be the funnel toward that administrative hearing officer. Something that has occurred to me as I've talked with constituents and investors and the realtors in town is that when we lift this moratorium, I think it's very likely that we will have within the first week at least 100 applications. Given our current staffing, I don't see how it is practical to think that they would be able to do an excellent job of enforcing while also processing and enforcing 100 new applications. And I think that's a relatively, so I see that the 6 months gives us a fairness to the folks that have given us their time in the community and in the investor community to share with us the things that are most concerned to them. Concern about enforcement is something that people on every side of this issue share. There is a shared belief that fixing the enforcement is going to make a big impact on how we decide to move forward with any other regulation with this. So that's the difference that I see in the 6 month versus 1 month. Just the ability to actually do the job well. Also to give us some time to get some adjustments, as Councilman Henderson has mentioned, to our fee structure so that we can actually pay for this enforcement. That's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Chairman Ledford had to step out for a moment. Thank you, Councilwoman Hill. Councilwoman Coonrod, you had another statement.
It's just coming across as more punitive than it is anything else. Like, I get it in your district, Councilwoman Hill, they can afford to pay $500. In my district, they can't afford to pay $500, and short-term vacation rentals are used to supplement people's income. And, some people are using it just for that. Now, it's not my intention to be in a tennis match, to go back and forth without comments. But I just, I don't want to create legislation that's going to just be solely punitive. Now, I get the enforcement part of it, but I think $500 will actually be a little too steep for some people. But I do hear your concerns. I do, but maybe we could look at a lower number. The fee it's not gonna, we've seen in a lot of instances where people can get called to the court, people just pay it. They don't care nothing about that. A lot of times that's still not correcting the behavior. So, but again, I do hear you. These are just my thoughts. And as I stated, I don't, there's no need to tennis the conversation back and forth. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, thank you. And Councilwoman Hill? All right.
Uh,
And then.
This isn't really tennis, this maybe is pickleball, but I just want to clarify one thing. Councilwoman Coonrod, I think you might have misunderstood what I was saying with the $500 for the administrative hearing officer. That is related to that $500 fee that we're up to for the fines and fees is related to people who are breaking the law. So running an illegal short-term vacation rental. And so as it relates to the affordability of that, I think that's a different conversation than the fees for licenses, which is still something that is very much on the table to be discussed. That's all. Thank you.
Right, thank you so much. And there's nothing wrong with a little spirited debate. So with that, I think Chairman Ledford is back, so he can have this seat.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, for the moment. So I guess the question for this evening will be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months. So council will have options, and of course amendments can be made from the floor at 6 o'clock. Any other questions on this item? All right, moving into planning items. I believe I saw an email, Councilman Henderson, regarding item F.
Yes, sir. Thank you. They are requesting that this item be withdrawn, and I'll be doing so at 6.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Any other items for first reading on planning this evening? Councilman Hester, you have the floor, sir.
I've had some concerns concerning L, and I think for the community, we're gonna need to push it back for about a month where they can talk with the developers. So that's my intent.
How
this
long, sir?
afternoon.
Sorry.
A month.
Okay. We'll look for that motion at 6 o'clock.
Good, thanks.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions or items on our zoning for this evening? Seeing none, we do have a added item under the mayor's office. Yes, ma'am. Councilwoman Knoll, you have the floor, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I have yet to speak to anyone in reference to 1109 Fairview Avenue. Is anyone here? Karen, have you heard from anyone?
Chris Anderson had passed along that there was an interest in speaking to Mr. Turk, the applicant. I did email Mr. Turk and ask him to contact you regarding the case and any information that, additional information that might need to be provided, but I did not hear back from him. And I don't know, it sounds like he did not contact you.
He has not, so it would be my intention to deny.
Okay.
And I will follow up with a phone call depending
Thank
on
you.
the action.
All right. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank
Thank you, Karen. Under resolutions, if you'll see Mayor's Office, we have a resolution sponsored by Councilpersons Henderson and Dotley. But before we take any questions on this, Councilman, we are going to have a bit of a presentation on this when we're run through the rest of our agenda before we go into Parks and Public Works. But you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. So it's my understanding, Chief, that we need to have an alternate version of this, and it makes a couple of changes. One, it references the amount, which would be up to an amount of $50,000 and then specifies where the funds are coming from.
That is correct.
So I guess, Mr. Chair, we need to get the alternate version placed on our agenda for this evening.
Very good. And I'm aware of the,
Doesn't change, it
sure. And I'm aware of the changes that were requested. Mr. Noblet, can you verify, have those changes been made to this particular caption, or do we have that in an alternate version?
I believe we have an alternate version that Maria has completed, and we were waiting for y'all's direction.
Very good. Thank you, Councilman.
And I'm good with the alternate version
Okay.
being placed on the agenda.
Okay, and we will have an education session on this here in just a few moments, and an opportunity for council to ask questions. Okay, if you'll take a look at purchases, we have one this evening from Fleet Management, Public Works. Looks like a combination sewer cleaner. Any questions on this particular item? We do have two RFPs, if you'll take a look at those. One from purchasing and one for the Air Pollution Control Bureau. Councilwoman Hill, you have the floor, ma'am.
I just related to the purchasing, the RFP related to a small dollar loan program for city employees. I just wanted to say that I was thrilled to see this come across our desk. Anything that we can do to help employees avoid payday loans and the very high rates of interest related with those, I think is a great thing. And I'm really hopeful that we find a program that works well for our city employees and for our city finance department, and that then we may be able to be kind of a light on a hill that other employers may be able to do something very similar. So thank you all for bringing this to us.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any other questions on our RFP requests this evening? We have no emergency items. We have, I think, a couple sole source to report. If I saw that correctly. Contract renewals, sorry. Any questions or comments on our purchasing part of today's agenda? If you would take a look, council, at your December 20th, say it with me, proposed agenda. Proposed agenda. Things change between now and then. And hit your light if you have any questions. Madam Vice Chair, so you have the floor.
Yes, I have a question about, on the resolutions, item F, it doesn't have the amount listed there. So is there an amount that, on the parks and outdoors?
We will have an amount shortly. Scott, I believe that the amount is imminently being placed on the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And Scott, maybe if Chairman Hester allows us to maybe address that just a little bit. I think that is something we would all like to know a little bit more about. If you could be prepared for that, if the councilman so desires. Okay. Future considerations. It's a little short given the time of year, I would expect. The only question I had was answered, and that is the RPA under planning item is coming out of the reserve funds. Karen, you've confirmed that for me. Okay. Any other questions on future considerations? I'd say that one naturally should be a little light. Okay. We have no department reports, but before we move into Parks and Public Works Committee, we do have a special presentation on referencing item A under the mayor's office. I'd like to go ahead and bring Joda up and kind of turn the floor over to you if you would.
Yes. Well, first, I do want to thank Councilman Henderson for his leadership in bringing this resolution forward, as well as several members on this council for co-sponsoring the legislation. This is something the administration does support. And although the budgetary situation did not start in the city of Chattanooga, our Office of Homelessness and Supportive Housing staff have been diligently working from the very beginning to ensure as many displaced residents as possible are able to be sheltered and then eventually able to transition into permanent housing. And I do want to say that we've been supporting a broad coalition of organizations led by the Chattanooga Regional Homeless Coalition, our strategic partner on homelessness relief efforts. And they've been doing a fantastic job. I really want to commend Mike and his entire team for their incredible work during this entire process. Especially given they had very short notice to respond, and it was a very difficult situation in terms of the scale. And during this process, we've been responding to a rapidly evolving situation. I don't think that the word crisis is too strong of a word to talk about the scale that we're dealing with here. Particularly, it is a crisis for those families. And given that this is a fluid situation, we're learning more each passing day, similar to any other form of emergency response the city would undertake. I want to underscore a few key things for this council before I bring Mike up here to provide a real comprehensive update on the data and the situation, so that way you all have the information you need to make an informed decision. The first one is, and I've heard a lot of confusion about this, is about just kind of refreshing a definition of homelessness for you all. By definition, once these residents were displaced by no fault of their own, they were placed into a situation where many of whom lost their income due to losing jobs that they were in walking distance of when they were in Eastridge. And if funding runs out and these folks lose their home, which many of them, or rather lose shelter, which many of them are at risk of, that places them within the federally recognized definition of homelessness, which is being imminently at risk of losing housing within the next 14 days. And we're very grateful that the Chattanooga Regional Homeless Coalition, as well as a broad range of organizations, are stepping in to make sure that doesn't happen. If this proposal for a resolution passes for an interlocal agreement, we are going to be able to really work to provide not only that short-term gap, but our team, city staff, will continue to do the work to get these folks transitioned into permanent housing. And I know that we'll talk a little bit about the process that has gone, that we've undertaken since the beginning of this. But a lot of organizations were involved in this response. The Chattanooga Homeless Coalition is a coalition, a broad coalition of organizations. And the process of placing these families into temporary hotel rooms was not undertaken by them alone. In fact, many of the referrals, if not most of the referrals, came from other organizations, including United Way, Hamilton County Schools, that were doing independent verification to make sure these were the displaced residents of Budgetel. And that work happened very quickly, and we're very proud of that. But it is important to understand that there are a lot of well-known, established institutions that have been involved in this response. It's a very complicated response effort. And as our staff and that team learns more, we anticipate the costs of responding to these folks and making sure they transition into permanent housing actually comes down. Again, not everybody lost employment, although many did. And so as we learn more, we anticipate the need will go down. But the bottom line here is that, around 110 households, 200 plus people, and maybe perhaps most importantly, 106 children are at risk of literal homelessness through no fault of their own. And the important part to understand is this is avoidable. As Budgetel may or may not reopen sometime in January, we do need a stopgap to allow our team and the Homeless Coalition and United Way and all of the agencies involved in the response to figure out either how to transition folks into permanent housing or to get them to the next step. And this gap that Councilman Henderson proposed is a necessary part of that. So thank you all for your leadership. And I believe that this council's on the cusp of demonstrating some real leadership, and we're very grateful for that. So without any further ado, I want to bring Mike up here to kind of give you a very robust update on where we stand. Thank you.
Thanks, Joda. Ms. Smith, how are you?
Hello, everyone. I don't have the clock going right now, so I don't know how to speak. So you'll see when we were putting together the presentation we were looking at, we wanted to be very clear that the Homeless Coalition is a nonprofit. But we represent many others. We represent the entire continuum of care, which covers 11 counties. We found out the day before the eviction that it was going to occur. And so we were quickly working with community partners to try and gather a response that could be boots on the ground during that time. Our role in that, we spent the night, we built up a landing page on our website for funding, that we were going to crowdsource funding. We created a separate landing page for that, just so that all funds that were brought in were earmarked and they weren't accidentally given to our general donation because we are a nonprofit. Some staff were on ground with the Hamilton County School Board that morning. They were there at 6. They arrived before any of the police officers did that morning. And they waited until the moment the eviction started occurring before they launched that announcement and that that funding campaign. The reason being, we wanted to make sure that was happening and that it was real. So the day of it, I want to highlight some of the community partners here. The coalition staff were present. Hamilton County School had their McKinney-Vento liaison, their homeless liaison present, as well as their social workers. They were assessing people's needs in 2 kind of micro vans or micro buses on site. They were doing it in those buses because they were heated. When they realized that those families did not have any other resources, they would bring it to the coalition's attention, who would authorize placement into an additional hotel. Community partners were there to transport for those who had no other resources. And the next crucial partner in this was the City of Chattanooga's Office of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, who was doing the same thing. They were there assessing people just to see, where are you going? Most people from the Budgetel had other resources, and they weren't. It was cold that day. It was early. They didn't want to talk. They didn't want to do an assessment. They self-resolved. So great. So what the OSH would do, it was the same as what Hamilton County would do, is they would alert it to our attention and the Homeless Coalition, because this is what we do. We host funds for community partners. We look at best practices. We would authorize that placement, and the placement would occur. So the Hamilton County School Board and then the City of Chattanooga were the ones that were verifying that during the day. Later the next day, United Way stepped in and was, through their 211 line, was using the Budgetel registry to help verify names for people that were calling 211, because as every nonprofit since then will tell you, our phones do not stop ringing. We were using that Budgetel registry to try and slim it down, even though even during the day, and Sam and his team will speak to it later, we were at 7 o'clock in the morning, we realized that this registry was no good. There were so many more people in that building, as we often see. Other crucial partners in this were Metropolitan Ministries, who were also doing placements that day off-site. Volunteer Behavioral Healthcare, who sent staff in from Ray County, McMinn County, Grundy County, and Hamilton County to be boots on the ground. They sent their veteran teams out. Veterans were housed that day between a partnership between Volunteer Behavioral Healthcare and Connecting Vets to Resources. La Paz was activated when we encountered that there were some that, and residing in Budgetel, that lacked English proficiency. And so La Paz has been working with them and has had positive placements. Help Right Here. If anyone knows Anne Marie, she was there to do what she could. And so many others. The Chat Foundation opened up the cold weather shelter for the first time of the year that night because it was dangerously cold weather. Union Gospel Mission was there handing out food. Silverdale Baptist Academy and Silverdale Baptist Church were there. I gave them a call. They wanted to know what they could do to help. They brought bus passes out. They were willing to transport. They were willing to do everything they could. So this is a coalition. We have additional partners. Chattanooga Room in the Inn, who's got openings. They said, hey, we'll take some families. H3 Minute, if there is one, is that it had kitchenettes. People were able to save money. Well, not only was it a cheap hotel, but they were able to cook their own food. Now they've been relocated to hotels that they don't have that ability. So the food bank and the community fridges have been crucial. The community fridge takes fresh produce out, and Mackenzie on our team can tell you she was there one of the times that one of the little girls knew that there was apples coming, so she sat outside the hotel for a couple of hours waiting on her apples. And lastly in this is the Homeless Coalition. We just work as a coordinating body. wanted to talk about how many people were impacted. On the day, we secured 75 hotel rooms that day. Very thankful to the city's Office of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. One of their staff members operated so efficiently. I was just in awe of his ability. He would call hotels and say, "How many rooms do you have? Can you clean the others? I want all of them, and I want you to build the coalition later." It was amazing. I couldn't do that. So I do want to commend Casey Tinker on the city's team. Later, as is often the case, when these closures happen, we don't catch everybody at first, even though our presence was very visible. We had so many partners, these buses, tables set up. We were giving out food, coffee. You missed some. Maybe some weren't there that night. Maybe some were at work. We didn't even, throughout the day, we saw people that were returning and who had no clue that this was going on. We even saw when the school bus let the children off that day. We even were there at 4:30 in the afternoon where a young lady walked up with her backpack on, staring at the group of police officers out front, and you could tell she's trying to figure out, what is this? And it dawned on us, she didn't know. And so one of the social workers would talk to her, and even her parent wasn't there right now either. She went to an after-school program. She was coming back. Those things hit in a different way. So this is just looking at where we could place them. The majority of the places happened at Super 8, the Chat Inn, Econo Lodge. And while some of these hotels on this list are a lot better than what the Budget Hotel was, it's what we could access. I don't think throughout any of this, the coalition or any of our partner agencies ever disputed the fact that the Budget Hotel was not a place that children should have been raised. So some of the work going on right now, we're connecting people with the housing navigators. This is really done primarily through the OSH and through the veteran programs. I also want to back up and commend the Housing Authority, who's actively working to flip as many of their units as possible and process housing applications. They really kicked it into warp speed to try and answer this response. So we've got 80 households that are currently staying in hotels that are working with housing navigators. And we have more than that, more households in hotels. However, it's a lot. This takes time to do. Just sheer paperwork alone, catching people when they're there. But the housing navigators are also working with some of those that were displaced that are not in the hotels as well. One of the great things, and I'm sure Sam can speak to it too, is that the Hamilton County schools have an MOU with the city and with the coalition so that we can assist them in finding and securing housing. The coalition's part in this is that what we do is, in this effort, is that we're the ones that can approve the hotel rooms because we have, we were able to secure the funding and act a lot quicker than either the county or the city government could have in that crisis. So we have had placements so far, 15 persons, 4 households, 8 adults, 7 children. The number may be actually a little higher because some people do self-resolve and just leave. But these are the ones that were now placed in permanent housing with very little assistance. They just needed help to get in the door. These people were working. Some lost their employment, but give them a chance. They could make it. Why did we settle on the 3-month number? The 3-month or 90 days is how the federal government, the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, judges a system of care, or continuum of care, is that from the moment of identification of someone in need, you should be able to house them within 90 days to show that your system is functioning. And the homeless response system as a whole is functioning better than I've ever seen in 20 years. It's an inflow problem is why we keep having issues. If we could stop the inflow, we could have it done by the end of the year. But so that's important to keep in mind. That's why we settled on 3 months. And within 3 months, we expect that we could house around 70% of these individuals and families. So the work that's been going on, 113 homeless preference voucher, they're pre-screens. That's with the Chattanooga Housing Authority. Paperwork takes time. Housing Authority, they love paperwork. People filling it out, not so much. But they have a lot of regulations that they have to meet. 70 background checks have been approved, and that's cleared through the Housing Authority. I think that's important. And the discrepancy between how many pre-screens and then the background checks that have been approved, it's just time. Some of those are still processing. homeless preference voucher applications started, so they were approved. Now they're starting that full voucher for or application for what used to be Section 8. It's now the housing choice voucher. 13 full applications submitted, and then 20 public housing applications completed. Some of the placements that we've had have been into public housing. That's huge. Betsy and her team are just rocking and rolling. We need time. We need to give them time. We need to give families time. So it's costing us around $65,000 every 2 months, or every 2 weeks for these hotel rooms. It fluctuates a little bit. Some hotels cost more than others. Sometimes some of the children, there's a lot of children in the unit, there's some damages sometimes. So the amount fluctuates. One thing that we do know is that there will be a natural attrition the longer we're able to do this, because we know where the people are. We're actively working with them to find housing. Is that the number of rooms we're utilizing are going to come down. So the funds are going to be able to keep going until we can hopefully see a positive placements for everyone. So one of the things that is here is that the Flexible Housing Fund is a fund that the coalition hosts through partnership with the city of Chattanooga, and we're partnered with EPB right now to secure funds for that. But that's another fund, kind of like this hotel fund in which we're talking, which we charge no overhead, no administration fees. We're grant funded federally and locally. That's what covers our staff. That's why we're able to manage these programs. That's why the coalition's in a unique place to do this, because one of our member agencies, if they hosted a fund, and this has happened in the past in our community that hosted a flex fund, they were primarily utilizing it for their own benefits and serving theirs instead of looking at the entire system of care. The coalition is that mortar in all of this. So the Flex Fund, which we're going to utilize to do a lot of these placements, it will be rental applications fees, utility arrears, identification fees, security deposits, utility fees. It's a very detailed guidelines on what that's eligible for. It's not eligible to be used for hotel rooms. This is housing. So going into the frequently asked questions, I know that there had been some recent fan mail dispensed. So is the Homeless Coalition making money off of this tragedy? Absolutely not. It's costing us money. It's costing us sleep. Our staff were there and are traumatized by some of the things. I have staff members that worked daily with a mother of 2 14-year-old twins that died from a heart attack. She probably bad life choices, I'm sure, but stress doesn't help either. So no, we're not making money. We've pledged and we've been very open to the community in our private fundraising is that all funds are passed through. We are really good at federal reporting. We welcome any report that any donor wants. We're really good at it. We don't fail our audits. We do single audits. We don't fail our monitorings for our state or federal funds or even local funds. We keep really good records, and we welcome any donor who wants to earmark their money. Give us a shot. One of the most beautiful donations we receive every month is from a veteran on fixed income, and he sends us $25 a month for veterans medication. It doesn't matter who, but that cost us too, because now we got to track that $25 donation to get it to a veteran who needs medication, but we do so gladly. That's what we do. We're the steward of people's trust and sometimes funds. Here, I'm going to hand it off to Sam. Any questions, I'm right here. So,
thank you, Mike. So I just wanted to run through a few of some of the questions that we've been getting. Mike and his team have done a tremendous job, as he's said, administering the funds, pulling together different community providers. And OSH really has kind of been serving as that boots on the ground, interfacing with a lot of the people that have been placed in hotel rooms. And so we can speak more directly to some of the trends that we've seen specifically. And a lot of the information that Mike does have has been reported to him from OSH. And so again, just to reiterate what Mike was saying, the coalition has a tremendous track record of administering a lot of different funds from us. We specifically chose them as our partner to administer our Flex Fund because they're able to administer that fund without taking any overhead for administration costs. And I have every confidence in their ability to manage this hotel fund moving forward. There's been a lot of questions about the number of residents being served. As already kind of been talked about a little bit, really a lot of the response day of was crisis management. And I want to make sure to thank Casey Tinker, who orchestrated that effort on my team. In his greater than 5 years of service for the city, he's handled a lot of large displacements in situations like this. And we kind of have a tried and true method of stepping up and responding. And we were able to very quickly place a lot of people in hotels. However, in this instance, even our capacities were a little overwhelmed. I think the difference that we find ourselves in now versus a few years ago is really the housing market really is saturated, and the need for more affordable housing has been felt by many in our community, and it's really affecting us now and our ability to get these people moved over into a new circumstance. A lot of the extended stays that existed at a comparable price point don't exist anymore. You know, the Chat City Suites, the Chat Inn was mostly full. We have a few people there, but a lot of these other locations just didn't have the capacity. We had this large storm surge of people needing assistance, and so we really did all that we could to place people in housing day of. As I'll talk about in a little bit, the vast majority of hotel placements took place during the response that day. But it was really kind of an all hands on deck scrambling situation. And then kind of afterwards putting the pieces together, working with that coalition and then moving forward. Okay, so the verification process of the people staying in the Budgetel, like I said, 55 of the hotel rooms that we had during the total course of time happened day of. And then there were 49 placements afterwards that were on the official registry. We had a guest list from the Budgetel and were able to verify that those head of households or another adult had rented that room. And then 18 were verified by social workers of other organizations using documentation. This documentation could have been a receipt that the household had been paying or someone else had been paying. That we encountered that some churches had put people up temporarily in the Budgetel, and a lot of people too were cohabitating with other guests, and they could provide that documentation to us. As of right now and today, and I commend all my OSH staff for really scrambling to get me a lot of this information. Now we've really stepped up our involvement in this response in the last couple of days to try to piece together this coalition. We have 110 hotel rooms being utilized by a total of 269 people. We hope to dwindle that number down every day moving forward, and we're confident that we'll continue to do so. But it's a process. It's not an instantaneous thing, as Mike talked about. For us to move people into housing, it takes time to fill out that paperwork, and a lot of those people are kind of mid through that process. If you think back to that slide showing the pre-applications, the full applications, those other things as we move forward with finding these people permanent housing. Here's a breakdown again of the numbers of the different verification buckets, if you will. The total number of households, and again, this is people that had been provided hotel rooms totally. 100 of those rooms were people that were on the official registry. The households that were cohabitating that OSH staff verified it independently was 12. And then of those, there was 4 additional households that were on site day of that weren't on the official registry, but obviously they were there with all their belongings, and we could verify that people had been staying there. And then afterwards, as we kind of looked at the response, then the kind of the days moving forward, we had some people, the United Way was stepping up through their 211 system that Mike said Metropolitan Ministries had been working, and they independently verified the people's residence in the Budgetel, and that was 6 households. Okay, so another question we've got a lot about is the large number of calls that was at the Budgetel, the concerns that were the criminal activity that is there, and the concern that what are we supporting people that are engaged in a criminal activity, and I think first and foremost, we view people that have a criminal history as having paid their debt to society and need just as anyone else in our community. Just because someone committed offense previously doesn't mean that they're not entitled to the security that permanent housing, gives people in our community. And we feel that all the folks who we're engaging with have expressed a desire to work and get back on their feet. and be self-sustaining. Just an example of the people we've engaged with so far, over 50% of them have lost their employment. And of the remaining percentage, significant loss in their income due to cut hours or sources of disruption. So, and additionally, in this, we are prioritizing families and people who are medically vulnerable. The coalition has those processes already in place through the coordinated entry system, and have that broad coalition of providers that really will work with families and try to get those folks in need assistance first. Okay, is this I think a great question is this a wise use of taxpayer resources? I absolutely believe it is, and we see this a lot in our homeless response. The quicker you can respond to a situation, the quicker you can get people placed in permanent housing, the quicker that they are able to find employment, get reintegrated back to society, and not require assistance. There's really a corrosive effect, if you will, that experiencing homelessness causes on people. And the longer that someone languishes in homelessness, the harder and more resource intensive it is for us to serve those people. And so we absolutely view this as a stopgap to just temporarily help people get back on their feet. I think of a gentleman that we housed recently that had been working at McDonald's 7 days a week, staying at the Budgetel. And he even was trying to Uber back and forth from the hotel that he was staying in Lookout Valley. And unfortunately, that just wasn't sustainable for him. He wasn't making enough money to justify those expenses. He's been communicating to our staff that he's, adamantly looking for housing now that he's been placed in public housing. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish with all of these families, right? Is that stability for them to put their lives back together. We recognize too that they're not a homogenous group. Of that 110 rooms, we have 110 different unique stories of people that are all kind of struggling to deal with this disruption. But we're confident that the vast majority of those people can be sustainable and won't require long-term assistance. All right, why is this money needed? Why can't the Homeless Coalition repurpose some of their existing money? I think that the reality is there's a lot of other people that are experiencing literal homelessness in our community, more so than ever before. And the funds that the coalition receives that they administer across this region are often encumbered by other programs and going to the assistance. The Flexible Housing Fund that Mike references is a great example. If we divert resources from that to respond to this crisis, it directly impacts our ability to get households off the streets who are currently experiencing homelessness. As Mike said, we are operating at an all-time high of getting those households off the streets and placed into housing, and any loss of momentum from that will directly hurt us in the long term of dealing with our overall homeless population. Again, we are confident that this number will continue to decrease in the overall number of hotel rooms we need. That number changed as of today, even of my staff going and working with people and being able to exit some people off. And so really, this is just a stopgap to help give us the time to get people to stability. All right. And then another question we've heard is, this is a great response for this, but what about other disasters that happen? What about fires or other instances? And the good news is we already have a lot of systems in place to deal with those problems. We work very closely with the Red Cross and the Salvation Army when there are instances of, a house burning down. We regularly receive referrals from the fire department itself to OSH to work on that rehousing process. And we, I think that it is different in this instance is the scale of the problem, right? And you think back to the times when, Patton Towers burnt down or had issues where they had to close or lost hotel rooms or other extended stays being shut down. It has necessitated a similar level of response and action from local government to provide that stopgap for people. All right, and then if the Budgetel is opening, why can't we wait? And the reality is, that's still some time out that the Budgetel is going to open. We have a kind of a tentative deadline for that, but I personally don't want to be beholden to a third party for when we're talking about the security of families having a place to stay over the holidays. And ultimately, our goal for these families, as well as any family in Chattanooga who's housing insecure or homeless, is to give them that stability where they're not having to contribute such a large amount of their money towards their housing, right? Like a lot of people that stay in these extended stays get trapped in these circumstances because they're unable to save up the money to move into housing. For example, it costs on average for OSH to move a household into housing $3,500 for moving costs. And many people don't have that, especially if they're contributing such a large portion of their income towards their rent in these extended stays. And so we're really confident that we will continue to be able to move forward in placing these households into more viable permanent situation. All right, and I think that is it.
All right, Sam. Appreciate that update. That has been very enlightening. I have Councilman, here we go. I figured we'd get more lights here. So Councilman Hester, you have the floor, followed by Councilman Henderson, followed by Councilwoman Hill.
First of all, let me say thank you to Mike, to Sam, to Chip for your foresightfulness. And let me say this, I was very outraged by the back and forth of the city, the county, and all these folks wanted was a pursuit of happiness. When our founding fathers of this democracy wrote the Declaration of Independence, they declared that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, among these are life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness. And all these folks who are displaced wanted was a pursuit of happiness. For them, it was just to walk to work or to walk to the grocery store, to cook in their own hotel room, or just pulling their lives back together. But I want to thank the city of Chattanooga being proactive on this measure, that we did not let these folks fall by the wayside, that we are our brother's keepers, and we are in line with the One Chattanooga, with the mayor's plan. I pray that we continue to look out for the least among us. But I do have a question for you, Sam. I think you kind of alluded to it, that my question is, how many of those who, I know you mentioned there was 106 children. How many folks were elderly and how many people were medically disabled who were displaced?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know that there were a few households that were even on hospice care. 7 households that were on receiving hospice services at the Budgetel. I don't have an exact figure of the households that, other than that were medically frail, but I can definitely get that information.
Thanks. I echo again, thank you guys for being proactive on this unfortunate occurrence. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Henderson, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little perplexed why anyone would begrudge taxpayer dollars going to help and aid in a human crisis such as this. And I didn't fill the bucket. I'm just helping carry the water, Councilman. Ellis or Chief, I don't know who, I know I've been dealing mostly with Ellis on this, but who is running point, coordinating with the motel owners as far as the rooms that we need and will need in
So
going forward?
I think that's our Office of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. That would be Sam Wolf and then Casey Tinker on our team.
Sam and
Sam and Casey. And
Casey.
Casey's really, is that right, Sam? Been really taking the point on identifying available hotel rooms.
When I spoke with the motel owners, I think their biggest question was, how long they needed to hold. They were more than willing to hold the rooms, but obviously they need to make sure that those rooms are booked as well. And they will be coming into their busy season in March. So I can certainly understand their concern. I just want to make sure that, and when I talked to them over the weekend, they weren't real comfortable with how long we actually need those rooms for. So we just need to do, I think, a little bit better job of coordinating with them to make sure that maybe on a daily basis, we're communicating how many rooms we need and maybe how much longer we think that we're going to need them, so that they're helping us. We just want to make sure that we're mindful of them and we don't cause them to have vacant rooms unnecessarily.
Totally agree. And that's one of the things that the coalition, even this far in their effort, has been very transparent. When, like our crowdsource funding, we said we would get everyone a 7 days notice. And that's why we sounded the alarm last week, is that we were at that 7-day window. We did call, I mean, because we are a small nonprofit, we have to wait until we see funds. So I did speak with the owners following the conversation that we had over the weekend, and just spoke with them on Monday, and reaffirm them, like, we're at this point, we can guarantee 7 days. Depending on how things go today and tomorrow, we may be able to verify with them that how much longer we're going to extend, and while we're working on other avenues. But yes,
Yeah, they're more than willing to work with us. They just want to make sure they understand for what length of time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Hill, you have the floor, ma'am.
There's no question in my mind that it's the appropriate thing to do for the city of Chattanooga to make funds available to help alleviate the suffering that is a man-made disaster. And I haven't spoken publicly about this until now, and I have a mic in front of me. So September 10th of 2015, I was on the board at Metropolitan Ministries when the Superior Creek Lodge, which is the exact same facility, was abruptly shut down, and we had a man-made disaster of families that were displaced. It was appalling. And I can tell that our ministry community, nonprofit community, have learned a lot since then with how to work together to respond. I see a lot more coordinated response to that. I know that the city of Chattanooga has learned a lot, because the city of Chattanooga has had some major missteps in the last decade with work like this. But I am deeply frustrated by the city of Eastridge. And what I'd like to know is, where do they fit in the partnership of all of this? I didn't see a City of Eastridge logo on the list.
So, to my understanding, there has not been a government contribution to this situation as of
Other
yet.
than the contribution of
Staff
hundreds of
time
people
from
being
City of Chattanooga.
displaced.
Well, right. And then also on top of that, I think the county school system has contributed staff time. This would be the first time, to my understanding, that a government entity would be contributing to the financial component of the relief efforts. I think tomorrow, depending on how this council votes, there will be a robust conversation at the county commission on this. And there are county commissioners on that body that also are represented on the Eastridge City Council. But I echo your concern and thought on this. And this is something the mayor and I talked about recently, which is that this is a perfect demonstration about how homelessness and housing insecurity is a regional problem. This is not something that the city of Chattanooga can bear by itself, nor should it. And we intend on making that point at commission tomorrow.
I would say that homelessness is a burden that we bear as human beings, not as municipalities or counties. We are a community of human beings. But I am very frustrated by the fact that this has now happened twice in 7 years, in a way that I believe is responsible. Sam, you pointed out that the cost to get somebody rehoused is about $3,500. I don't know that that's the full cost to restabilize a family. I think it's closer to about $6,000 to restabilize a family once they've found themselves homeless. Am I over that number?
That's a rough estimate for the kind of aggregate of OSH when we place a household into housing. That's just the first month's rent, security deposit, and any application fees.
Okay. So that's a big difference. Just to point out, the first and last month's rent is something that's very different when you're in a permanent housing versus a weekly stay motel, which is something as we think about how what our registry of housing is in the city. I mean, this is part of why people find this to be a useful housing option, right? Because you don't have a first and last month's rent, you don't have utility bills and the credit that you have to have for utility. I guess that's all that I really have to say about that, except that I'm just deeply sad that this happened. And it's it's caused by systemic issues. And I know that we as a city are working toward it. If a municipality can't kind of get some stuff together, maybe they need to dissolve. And I mean, if you can't do it, and probably shouldn't have said that out loud. That's all.
Any other questions or comments for Sam or Michael on this topic? I'm not seeing any other lights from council. Sam, Michael, thank you for coming. I did have one last question, and that is, I loved that you said this is a longer term plan that you're working on these folks not landing back at Budgetel, which gave me great hope. That gave me great hope. And I appreciate you saying that. This emergency effort, as we're calling it, can you confirm that this is aimed at families with children and those that are medically disadvantaged?
There are households that do not have children or do not have medical vulnerabilities. However, we're confident that those households will require less assistance because there's a higher probability that those folks will want to work and find it, become self-sufficient quicker.
But there are over 100 children?
Correct. The vast majority of the households have children.
That's all I needed to hear. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Council, any other further questions on this item? Okay. Appreciate the presentation for everyone being here this afternoon. We'll now move into Parks and Public Works Committee meeting with Chairman Hester. Sorry, I got lots of stuff.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome to Parks and Public Works. Can we accept Madam Clerk, can you read 6 ordinance first reading, please?
An ordinance closing and abandoning 2 wastewater easements in the 1800 to 1900 blocks of Southern Street, the 19 to 2200 blocks of Roanoke Avenue within tax map numbers 136 EA 005, 005.1, and 005.02 for economic development of the former Harriet Tubman Home site as detailed on the attached map, subject to certain conditions.
Thank you. See no hands. Resolution 7, please.
A resolution authorizing the administrator for the Department of Public Works to award the on-blanket contract number W22022-201 focused SSES and rehab blanket contract for wastewater consent decree for year 1 of 4 to SAK Construction LLC of O'Fallon, Illinois, and Inliner Solutions of Orleans, Indiana, for the annual amount of $24.5 million and accepted the value engineering costs of both contractors.
Thank you. Scott, please. We have, can you read Resolution 7F as Scott comes up? Thank you.
A resolution authorizing the administrator for the Department of Public Works and Parks and Outdoors to execute a donation agreement with AstroTurf Corporation in substantially the form attached for the donation of all labor, materials, equipment, services, taxes, and all other items necessary to convert a natural grass field to synthetic turf for Jim Frost Stadium at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, for an estimated total project cost in the amount of blank.
We have a number. Mr. Chair, it's my pleasure to bring this partnership to you, and it came up quickly, and I appreciate Mr. Ledford getting this up on the agenda. We had a great partnership come together because we learned something this past year. In order for Frost to continue to host UTC at a high competitive level and to possibly be able to land NCAA Division II and the NC Junior College Division I long-term softball tournaments, we need to convert and upgrade that field to turf. Second page. Well, we're near an area that produces a lot of turf, if y'all know that, in this industry. And a UTC grad by the name of Thomas Green is an executive with AstroTurf and worked with Greta Hayes on our staff and Dennis Malone. And then we're very much assisted by Debbie Talley and folks in Phil's office to arrange a donation of about $600,000 to allow us to convert that field to turf, which will allow us to activate that far more frequently during events when allow us to show off the city in higher regards and be more competitive. And it'll do so in a way that I think honors the best of Chattanooga, which is everyone coming together to get some good stuff done. So thrilled to be able to present that today. I deserve no credit. All credit to Dennis and Greta and that team that made this happen.
Thank you. Great job. You guys have any other questions? Okay. Okay. Oh,
Yes, sir.
I understand donations. Right. Oh, Ken Smith, please. Councilman Smith, excuse me.
Thank you, Chair. So Scott, just to make sure that we hear that out loud, that is 100% donation, zero
Wow.
cost
Zero
to either
cost to the
organization
taxpayers.
in this. That's
Correct.
amazing. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. And thank them. And thank UTC for the great partnership as well.
Go Mox. Yeah. Yeah, go Mox. In fact, it's a lot of Mox alumni up here. Yeah, we representing. Thank you. Chip Henderson, Councilman.
Thank you, sir.
Henderson.
So, and I think this is going to be a great improvement for the city. And we were for a long time known as the sports mecca of the South. I mean, if you wanted to host a softball tournament, you came to Chattanooga. We've gotten a little bit behind the eight ball lately. A lot of the fields that I go to now are AstroTurf. They're turf fields. Tournament goes on, rain or shine. We can't do that everywhere in Chattanooga. And that is something that I think we might have to turn our focus and attention to in order to get back up on top of the game.
Yes, sir. And Mr. Henderson, just to build on that, we heard that loud and clear from the marketplace. They still want to come to Chattanooga. We're a wonderful destination. We have all the bits and pieces. It's bringing our facilities up to par with our competitors, and everyone has raised their game, as you know so well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Scott. I see no other hands. G, please, Madam Clerk.
A resolution authorizing the administrator for the Department of Public Works to transfer the city's share of the Wilcox Boulevard Bridge project expenses to the Tennessee Department of Transportation in the amount of $12,822,583, plus a 10% contingency amount of $1,282,258.30 for a total amount of $14,104,841.30.
Thanks a lot. This concludes Parks and Public Works Committee. President, we're going to adjourn to 6. Can I? Oh, I have the chairman, please. You good? Okay. Adjourn to 6. Let me hit this gavel. Oh, there we go. I got time for the end.